Come with tired and broken spirit, he welcomes you with love. Come confused, in need or searching, he welcomes you with love. Come with joy and come with sorrow, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. He never turns away those coming, he welcomes you with love. He never turns away those calling, he welcomes you with love. He never turns away a seeker, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. His arms stretch wider than our failures, he welcomes you with love. And no past fault pulls off the Savior, he welcomes you with love. Jesus, he is so much greater, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. His heart is kind, his love is patient, he welcomes us with love. And there's no need for fear or acting, he welcomes you with love. His hands they offer warmth, inclusion, God welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all in love.
Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to Shabbat at the house. My name is Natalie Kendel, and I will be your host for today. You've joined us on the official YouTube channel of the house. The house is a house church where we often get together on Saturdays to share stories, music, and more. You can enjoy the recordings of these online here on our channel in your own time. Coming up today, we will be singing together, giving a quick reminder of two exciting events coming up this October, and we'll be exploring a story found in the book of Exodus. To begin this morning, I have a few bits of information for you. First off, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive notifications when we're live or have uploaded a new video. We communicate what events are happening and when on our social media platforms. So stay up to date on our events. You can find us on Facebook and on Instagram. A special thank you today to Shairon Milliard, one of our patrons on our Patreon, and thank you to all who share our videos online. If you're interested in free audiobooks to listen to, then Read Aloud Corner might be something for you. At Read Aloud Corner, we pick really good books and they are made available as free audiobooks on YouTube. For example, in the past, I've read through the Chronicles of Narnia, the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis, and we are currently reading through Robin Hood. Read Aloud Corner is great if you're looking for something to wind down with at the end of the day, or perhaps listen to while you're out and about. Click the link below to discover the full audiobook playlist and be alerted to future uploads by subscribing. Sometimes here at the house, we share recommendations ranging from books to YouTubers that are truly worth going and checking out. Our recommendation today is of a lecture called Life After the Murder, offered by Ida Emilia Huber. Despite trauma being a widespread and deeply affecting thing, our society is sadly woefully ill informed and ill equipped to meet that in a responsible and enlightened way, whether it be at schools, universities, with companies, or in the workplace. Ida is offering an inspiring 1 hour long lecture. The lecture includes her sharing her personal story, research and information about complex trauma, and concrete tools which help equip staff and students alike to become better allies and more understanding of how to meet complex trauma. Visit Ida's website below to learn all about how you can hire her to come and deliver a lecture at your school or organization, and all about the resources which this lecture offers. The lecture is available to be delivered in both English, Norwegian, and Swedish. Ida is a brilliant video and documentary creator and communicator, and this presentation can help empower your place of learning and work. So go check out the link below and share the website with anyone you know who might be interested in benefiting from this lecture. And we can warmly recommend checking out her documentaries as well. There will also be a link for that in the description below. In case you missed it last time we met, we have 2 exciting events coming up soon at the house. This October, there are 2 special days which we'll be celebrating together: the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles. These 2 days are highly important events in the Israelites' calendar, and their meaning and significance immensely deep, relevant, and impactful to us today. Therefore, we'll be celebrating these 2 special days together during Shabbat at the house. We will celebrate the Day of Atonement on the 1st of October. We'll share this on the same YouTube channel from 11 a.m., so the usual time. And the week after, we're celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles on the 8th of October. During both these events, we'll learn why these days matter, what they mean, how they affect us, and where they fit in the larger biblical story. So if you know little or nothing about the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles, no worries. We'll cover all that on those 2 days. So jot the dates in your calendar if you're interested in joining us, and we'll post all the information about these events on our Facebook and Instagram as we draw closer to that time. And we hope you'll join us on October 1st and 8th. Lastly, for the information bits, we sometimes share a segment here called How to Be Image Bearers. During this, we look at many and diverse examples that people can communicate God's love in the world around them. Today's example is taken from a Facebook post. Amber Robbins shared, "Dear Amazon Prime Guy, you have no idea what you just did when you took a moment to slam dunk and shoot a couple of hoops with my son and his friends, just to return an hour later with a brand new basketball for him since it was worn out and going flat. What you don't know is that my son had a really hard day at school today. He's been dealing with a classmate being mean to him for a few days now, and you did what I tried to do but couldn't. You turned the whole day around. Probably his whole week. I wish I would have asked your name, because the world should know what a good human you are, and I would have loved to personally thank you." May we be inspired by this loving example. Let's sing together By Remembering We Rest, and then we'll jump straight into our story for today, taken from the book of Exodus.
On this Sabbath day, we take the time to persist from our own works and recall the day God rested from all the beauty He had made. And we ask that His restoring power recreates His life inside of us. For by remembering we rest on this holy day. When we recall that God is God and life depends on Him, we can stop pretending we're in charge and let the King be King. And we ask that His restoring power recreates His life inside of us. For by remembering we rest on this holy day. It is more than just a cease from toil or a passive pause of work. For we find true rest when we recall that we have a Creator. And we ask that His restoring power recreates His life inside of us. For by remembering we rest on this holy day. This memorial to His good work now invites us to partake. All humanity is welcomed in to the blessings of this day. And we ask that His restoring power recreates His life inside of us. For by remembering we rest on this holy
Today's story is found in the book of Exodus. The context of our story is that the Israelites have finally been released from their captivity and slavery in the land of Egypt. God has gone up against Pharaoh of Egypt, insisting that Pharaoh let the Israelites go, and finally, Pharaoh gives in. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go." Verse 40. Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. This is a truly remarkable day and a momentous event. An entire once enslaved people are going to, in the course of one day, all leave Egypt together. I once knew a couple who had a sheepdog. This particular breed is excellent for herding, as the dogs tend to naturally want to herd sheep together, to keep a flock together. And this doesn't just apply to sheep either. When the couple had guests over, and we might, as a group, go out for an afternoon walk, their dog wouldn't walk along sniffing trees and watching squirrels. It would run from the front of the group to the back of the group, to those people who were walking quickest at the front, to the stragglers of the company at the back, and try to herd the group to keep the group together. Back and forth it would run till it tired itself out, trying to collect and contain these silly humans who just couldn't seem to have the decency to all walk at the same pace. And if you've ever tried to be a tour guide or lead a hiking group, or even been a parent with more than 2 children in a shopping mall, you'll probably know how challenging it can be to move a group of people from one place to another. Because people walk at different paces, people have different interests and needs. Some are very focused on arriving at their destination as quickly as possible, while others like to chat and saunter and get distracted by bumblebees. And that doesn't even begin to cover things like injuries or someone getting lost. Let us now consider the logistical challenge ahead of the Israelites. Yes, they've been released from Egypt, and they may leave, but firstly, they know limited information about how they're going to get there. They don't just have a road map or a sat-nav to follow. God has said He's bringing them into the wilderness to worship Him, and beyond that, to the land of Canaan. Secondly, this isn't a group of 10 people, or even 50. We read from verse 37, "There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds." So, we read that there were 600,000 men. Let's double that to include the women, so that's 1,200,000 adults. And then let's be conservative and say that half those couples have 2 children each. That brings us to a total of 1.8 million people. And verse 38 stated that many other people went with them too. So it appears that the other people are departing with the Israelites from Egypt, many other people. And then on top of that, it also says they brought large droves of livestock, flocks, and herds. So that's 1.8 million people plus, and then flocks and herds. And most of us probably know that animals don't always go where you lead them easily. Imagine the chaos. Imagine the noise. Every family has belongings. Traveling like that doesn't move quickly. It doesn't go according to plan. How are the Israelites going to be led from Egypt to the Sinai desert? How are you going to communicate with everyone? How are you going to keep everyone in a group? What happens when a carriage wheel breaks? Are you going to stop the movement of 1.8 million people at the drop of a hat to wait for that wheel to be mended? And then we have further complications, stopping for lunch. Verse 39. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. So, now 1.8 million people are stopping to bake breakfast too. We might be starting to get a small glimpse of the enormity of the challenge ahead. How to travel as a group of millions with all these complications. And we might be starting to think, how are the people ever going to get there? Despite this question, we read in verse 51, "And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions." How is God going to do this? How are they going to be led to where they're going? Is Moses going to run like an exhausted sheepdog from the front of the group to the back? Well, we find our answer in chapter 13, verse 21. "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people." So, it appears it's not Moses leading the way. The Lord in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night at the front of the Israelites. And the text tells us this pillar never leaves its place in front of the people. God Himself is going to be leading the way. Well, He leads them out of Egypt, and here is the route they take. Chapter 12, verse 37. "The Israelites journeyed from Ramses." This is one of the great Egyptian cities that they as slaves built for Pharaoh. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. As we can see here on the map, at Succoth they encamp and bake their bread. Chapter 13, verse 20, we're told they leave Succoth, and after leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. Now, if you know the geography of this part of the world, you might have noticed something, and that is that there's a shorter way to the Sinai desert. There's a quicker route to where the people are going. So why is God leading them via the scenic route? Is the pillar of cloud and fire lost? Verse 17. "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle." So we're told here that God, instead of leading the Israelites through what was then Philistine country, avoided that area and took a longer route to avoid it. And the reason He does this is expressed by Him saying, if the people now face war, if the people now face a battle, if they run into Philistines who don't want them tracing across their borders and they have to fight, the people might change their minds and return to Egypt. A battle now may cause them to lose their will to move forward. It might frighten them, put them off, and leave them running back to slavery. And then, quite interestingly, the very next sentence said, "The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle." Is this a discrepancy in the text? It appears that God knows something about the Israelites that they don't know about themselves. They march forward thinking, "We're ready for battle." But God says, "No, you're really not. You are not ready for battle. We're going to take a route so we completely avoid the chance of that." And so they instead take a desert road towards the Red Sea. And at this point, we're also told this detail in verse 19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with me from this place." This is a bit of an odd baggage to bring along. Joseph, an ancestor of the Israelites who died in Egypt, looked forward to the day when God would deliver his people and bring them up out of that place. And in anticipation of that event, asked his fellow Israelites to promise that they would move his remains, take it with them, and bury him in the land promised to his forefather Abraham. Chapter 14, verses 1, 2, and 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon." So the Israelites did this. Verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. Now, the Egyptian army was not just any old army. It was notoriously skilled and powerful at defeating its enemies. And the Egyptian military generals would have been elite in their ability to lead their troops. If you're an Egyptian general and you're leading hundreds of thousands of troops, how are you going to effectively do this? With all those soldiers, not everyone can see the commander at the front. Not everyone can hear his orders as he's shouting them out. What if it's night and dark? Imagine being at the very back of that company. Perhaps you're wounded, maybe you're tired. Well, the Egyptian army solved this problem with the use of something called meshal. These were cressets, an iron vessel on top of a pole. As illustrated here, they were metal containers containing oil, grease, and wood or coal. And then these meshals would be lit and then mounted on the high pole. Then officers at the front would carry these poles so that the whole army, right back to the very last man, would be able to see them. This was not a unique practice to the Egyptians. Later on, the Persian and Greek army still did this, using fire and smoke signals to guide and give direction to the troops. In fact, this Egyptian practice was so well known that there was a common, well-known saying in Egypt about Egyptian generals. We can find this even today recorded on ancient papyrus. The generals of the Egyptian army were referred to as a flame streaming in advance of his army. And on a well-known papyrus, a commander of an expedition was called a flame in the darkness at the head of his soldiers. Marching for days, confused, hungry, tired, even if you couldn't see your commander, you'd see the light or the smoke. Reassurances that you still have a leader and you are being led. God had not just chosen a random way to appear to the Israelite people. He has used a familiar sight to them, something which would be understood both to them and to the Egyptians. He appears as a pillar of cloud and fire at the head of his people. He is himself the Meshal for Israel. He is declaring himself the commander at the head of this company. But this isn't much of a company to lead. Besides being full of women and children, we've already read that the Israelites are not ready to fight. Well, they may not be ready for battle, but it appears now, as we stand on the edge of the Red Sea, as Egypt's chariots barrel towards them, that they must become so or die at the hands of their oppressors. Israel is caught between the sea and an elite army. God may have promised the Israelites that they would escape slavery and reach the land promised to them. But now, with hundreds of Egypt's best chariots bearing down on them, the roaring warriors of a mighty empire, led by Pharaoh himself, we can't help but wonder, how are the people ever going to get there? Verse 19. Then the messenger of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. The Lord, who has been leading the people from the front, now also goes behind them. This commander of the Israelites puts himself between them and their enemies, both in front of them and behind them. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. This isn't usually how a general or a commander acts. A general is meant to lead those following him into battle. But this particular commander doesn't seem to intend for his people to fight. Instead, God protects them all night, being a shield at their back. Then God says to Moses, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving, and the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Verse 26. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. Years later, David would write about this event in Psalm 77. "Your way was through the sea, your path through the mighty waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron." God, in this story, fights for the people, and he leads them through the waters. And from the far shore of the Red Sea, he continues to lead them all the way to Mount Sinai, where they arrive 50 days after the day they left Egypt. Every step of the way, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the pillar, God himself, never leaves them. Now, God has appeared in other forms throughout the biblical story. Not long ago, he appeared in the form of a burning bush to Moses. So why is he appearing now as this pillar of cloud and fire? Well, we have already mentioned how he's utilizing a familiar military concept, something which the people could understand and relate to, thus sending the message that he takes on himself the role as their leader and their commander. But there's a second layer to this, and it's a rather obvious one, though perhaps easy to miss. The Israelites are traveling through a desert. Deserts get very hot during the day and then tend to get very dark and very cold at night, far away from any other light sources, and the temperatures plunge. The people traveling would have faced very difficult traveling conditions, over stark and parched terrain, and also having to contend with violently fluctuating temperatures, scorching in daylight hours and freezing at night. God could have appeared to the Israelites in the form of a road map, a sword, or a floating hand in the air. But the God who is leading them, traveling at the head of them, appears as a cloud during the day and fire at night, meaning he was shade and cool for them at day, and light and heat in the night. God's very presence serves to fulfill their practical needs on their journey. A third function of the pillar of cloud and fire is described in both Exodus 40 and Numbers 9. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. And this is echoed in Numbers 9. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the Israelites encamped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command, they encamped. As long as the cloud stayed, they remained in camp. When the cloud remained a long time, the Israelites obeyed the Lord's order and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud was over the tabernacle only a few days. At the Lord's command, they would encamp, and then at his command, they would set out. Sometimes the cloud stayed only from evening till morning, and when it lifted in the morning, they set out. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle for 2 days, or a month, or a year, the Israelites would remain in camp and not set out, but when it lifted, they would set out. At the Lord's command they encamped, and at the Lord's command they set out. So this passage in Exodus and Numbers, particularly Numbers, sort of is hammering in the fact, repeating it again and again. And the fact is that the pillar of cloud and fire, God himself, is the one deciding whether the Israelites set off or stop. He decides when they go, how far they go, when they rest, and when they set up camp. God has been the one telling them when to move and stop ever since they left Egypt. Now, what are the implications of this? Well, as we've said, if you're moving a large group of people, they all have varying paces. They will have a variety of needs. In a group of people, in this case millions of people, what sort of delays and complications might we find? Well, firstly, there's the elderly. Not everyone in those millions would be young, spry people. There would be pregnant women who might not be able to walk as fast or as far as some. There would be sick people having illnesses of various kinds. There might well be malnourished people among them, low in energy from years of mistreatment in Egypt. There are children. They get tired, they need rest, they need to sleep. There are those with various disabilities, missing a limb, the blind, those with long-term illnesses, physical injuries. And when you take into account how many of these type of so-called complications might arise, you might scratch your head and end up thinking, I know God has promised to lead the Israelites to a better place, but how are the people ever going to get there? Today we live in a world strongly swayed by the survival of the fittest idea. It's this idea that, particularly in a crisis, the strongest, the fastest, these are those who will survive, and that this process functions as a sort of natural selection, weeding out the weaker elements of humanity, of human DNA, and leaving behind only the best. A sort of trial by fire from which emerges the most refined and capable. And this sort of thinking would not have been foreign or far from the minds of the Israelites either. Leaving Egypt, they might say, we're escaping from slavery. Our enemies are at our backs. We've been in bondage for 400 years. We want to get as far and as fast away from Egypt as possible. We want to put as much distance between that past life and us as possible. We want to get across this blasted desert to where we're going. We have limited resources in the wilderness. Now, it's got to all be about the survival of the fittest. We can't just stop every time old Joe has a fever. We can't halt 1.8 million people just because an ill child can't be moved, or the lady in the next tent is giving birth, or some guy lost his cows during the night and he has to go herd them up. We must prioritize the majority, not the minority. We can't coddle everyone out here. Here, if you fall behind, you're left behind. If you're too weak to make it to the promised land, it's probably for the best. But God leaves no room for survival of the fittest among his people. When God leads the way, nobody falls behind. Nobody is left. The weak, the old, the slow are not treated as burdens or problems. In God's camp, it is the slowest of them who sets the pace, not the quickest. There's a saying which goes, "It's the journey, not the destination." Now, of course, the Israelites are being led towards a destination, towards a goal. But this is where the people learn something about how life is when God is leading the way. When God leads the way, the journey with God tells us as much about him as the destination does. Because not only has he brought them out of slavery, delivered them, and is leading them to their own land where they might have freedom and prosper, but the way he leads them there tells you volumes about who is leading you there and what sort of life he's leading them into. The way God leads the Israelites in the pillar of cloud and fire speaks loud and clear about the sort of leader he is. God personally leads his people, not merely by sending directions, but personally taking them there, showing them the way. He makes sure that everyone in the camp can see him, even those at the very back can see him leading. He repurposes a familiar image of the Meshal, communicating that he is their commander and he will lead the way. He cares for their practical present needs, being himself shade in the desert sun and fire in the night of cold and darkness. He not only leads the way forward, but he has their back as the past came to reclaim them. He defends his people. He wasn't demanding that they themselves had to fight for their freedom. Instead, he puts himself between them and their enemies and fights for them. He makes sure to lead them on a path that wouldn't be too much for them at the time and end up breaking their spirits and will to keep following him. He makes sure that the people all move together, not leaving behind the weak. He shows that he values people differently than we often do, and makes sure that everyone gets there. It's not merely striking that God himself would lead his people to the place he promised them, but how he leads them there. It tells us what kind of leader, what kind of God this God is. The Lord still walks ahead of his people, of anyone who wishes to be delivered from slavery, oppression, cruelty, and hatred. I don't know how your journey has been lately. Perhaps you feel like you're never going to get to that end goal, to what God has promised us. And we might say, I know God has promised to lead me to a better place, but how am I ever going to get there? I don't know the way. I'm exhausted. I'm ill. I feel like I'm falling behind. If this is a race, I can't keep up. This wilderness is barren, and I can't keep up. This is the promise. This is the comfort to anyone following the Lord. If God is leading your way home, he is going to make sure that you get there, that everyone who wants to gets there. That means that you're not behind, You don't have to worry about being left. It doesn't matter how slow you are. And God doesn't merely care about the goal, He also cares about walking with you presently, every day, caring about the tired, caring for those in the scorching days and the freezing nights. When the Lord leads, He won't leave anyone behind. Nothing will stop God from getting you there. Not even death itself. Look at the example of Joseph. Even him being dead didn't stop God from bringing him. Ram Dass, in describing life's journey, wrote, "We're all just walking each other home." How do we treat each other in our communities, in our churches, as we're walking home? Are we inclusive and make room for each other, allowing for different paces and journeys? Or do we adopt the survival of the fittest model? Do we treat the ill with impatience, the young with indifference, the weak with neglect, leaving behind those we feel can't keep up or don't deserve to be brought along at all? Nehemiah wrote of this exodus from Egypt, "You, in your great compassion, did not forsake them in the wilderness. By day the pillar of cloud never turned away from guiding them on their path, and by the night the pillar of fire illumined the way they should walk." The experience of following the pillar of cloud and fire through the wilderness reveals a glimpse of what it's like to live following the Lord, what life is like when He's leading, and how He treats anyone who follows. Whatever you're threatened by, whether it lies behind you or ahead, the pillar has your front and your back, shielding and leading. So whether you find yourself at the front of the crowd or at the very back, you can say with confidence, "I know God has promised to lead me to a better place, and I follow Him because I know that He will get me there." As we consider these things, let us sing together, "I Will Bring You Home," a song by Michael Card.
Though you are homeless, though you may
Jesus, you know where each person here is today. The tired, the hesitantly hopeful, the fed up, the excited, the joyful, the lonely. Please, as you led your people through the sea, through the desert, please lead us. Please walk us home. Assure us that it's not by our strength that we'll get there. It's not our ability or faith that better things will come through. It is by your commitment, your persistence, and your patience that our days of burdens and sufferings will turn into freedom and celebration and peace. Let us not discount the people whom you treasure. Let us experience your comfort and your light in the darkness. Give us hope and be our strength. In the coming week, let us dare to be kind to ourselves and to those around us. Let it be so. Thank you all so much for joining us here at Shabbat at the House today as we journeyed from Egypt and into the Sinai Desert. Next time we get together will be on the 1st of October for the Day of Atonement celebration. What will happen after God leads the Israelites to Mount Sinai? We'll pick that up in October. May the shalom of Jesus be with you. See you next time.